Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Nice shirt, Pedro.
Team Waxhaw shirt.
Need to hang a black screen behind you.
Yeah. Sometimes it works for me, sometimes it doesn't work for me.
Otherwise, you have to be so close to your camera that we could just kind of
See you.
count the hairs on your face. There you go.
You got your wish.
Just don't let us hear you think.
Okay.
Hey, Barbie, if it gets to 2:30, then I'm still rambling on.
Okay. Time to break.
Tell us to take a break.
Cut him off, Barbie. Just cut him off.
Just cut him off. I'll do that.
Elisa, I like the background.
Thank you.
All right, I think everybody is on that needs to be on. So I'm going to call this meeting to order. But first, I'm going to allow Barbie to take a roll call, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I believe everyone is accustomed to how the meetings are operating. I just wanted to jump into the roll call. Please indicate you are present. Mayor Ron Pappas,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Brenda McMillan,
Present.
Commissioner Jason Hall,
Lost him. I thought he was on already.
okay,
Let me check that while you're calling the rest of it.
all right. Commissioner Ann Simpson,
Present.
Commissioner Tracy Westlick,
Present.
Commissioner Pedro Morey,
Present.
and do we have Jason Hall? Commissioner Jason Hall?
We'll soon find out. I'll hold for a couple of minutes in here.
Hello.
Hello. And Commissioner Jason Hall.
Sorry about that.
There we go. So all in.
Thank you. All members are present now.
Very good. All right, we can just get going with this right out of the gate. So welcome everybody again. Happy New Year to everyone. Hope you had a great stay-at-home New Year, I guess we call it. Some of us went out, some of us didn't. So I didn't. I was probably asleep by 10, getting old. Anyway, I'm going to turn the meeting over to our town manager. Jeff, you can take it from here.
Thank you, Mayor. And it's probably been at least 15 years since I remember staying up for the new year, maybe even longer. So you're not the only one. So I figured we'd start with chapter 3 today, and you'll have me talking for pretty much the full 3 hours for this round. So I appreciate Barbie brought me a good bit of throat lozenges earlier to hopefully be able to make it through, but I'll make sure that we also take a break around 2:30, and Barbie's going to remind us to do that when the time comes. So with that, chapter 3, which is a pretty meaty chapter, which is why I wanted to start with this one and make sure that we got through it. It pretty much covers most of our administrative and all of our enforcement procedures and how all this works. As you see here on the far left, how the chapter is structured, we have it divided into 8 different sections, and you have the first kind of your general housekeeping stuff, a separate section on administrative decisions, legislative decisions, special use permits, what happens at withdrawal of applications, the effect of denial on subsequent applications, appeals and variances, and then lastly, violations. So this particular chapter is 26 pages. So it is more on the lengthy side of some of our chapters. And so let's dig in. So first off, your general housekeeping stuff. Purpose is to provide efficient, reasonable, impartial admin and enforcement of the code and establish a procedure for compliance of the code. Right off the top, as we always ask, a complete application is required for anything, regardless of how big or how little it is. We want a complete application, all supporting material, and that could include site plans, building elevations, detailed drawings, and applicable fees. Certainly not limited to that. If the process requires multiple copies of materials, all copies must be submitted for the application to be considered complete. And a lot of this stuff we go over with them during the pre-application period as well. Most people don't just walk in and hand us an application to do anything. Most people contact us either by phone, by email, or sometimes by walking in to ask about the process, what they need to do, what they need to have, what the fees are, and all that kind of good stuff. So,
Jeff, just for clarity, I have a question on that one.
yes.
On the application, on the deeming it complete, who does that and what does the applicant get?
So we have a number of different applications depending on what process that you are looking to do. So typically our one-stop shop is Elisa. She gets the applications in and processes them, and then make sure that they get out to whoever is assigned for the review. If it's a non-residential type review, like for instance, Arby's, when they submitted, she takes the payment, makes sure that the application is complete, and then disperses that to the planner that is put in charge of reviewing that application. In that particular case, that was herself. But say, if it was Madison, for instance, then she would distribute out that to Madison, make sure that the fees have been complete. completed and the application is complete, everything's with it. And then he takes it and runs with it from there through all of our processes, such as making sure that it gets out to the TRC, doing our own internal review, and then everything beyond.
Sometimes an applicant will say, hey, I thought my application was complete. So I guess the question was back to you guys on what do we provide the applicant to make sure that they have something in hand that says their application is complete and there isn't anything almost like inspections when you say, yeah, you do this list and I'll get it done. Then they come back with another list.
Oh, we have a checklist and it varies from what type of request it is. Whenever somebody reaches out to us about what the requirements would be for submittal, we provide them with the application information, usually a copy of the application, and then the checklist required for a complete application, what would be required on the plans, all that good stuff. So we have a number of different checklists that are provided, and we do not have, I guess you would say, checklists upon checklists. You know, once they meet the requirements, they meet the requirements, and that's that.
How do they know they met the requirement even though they've turned it in? I guess the question is, who deems it and what does the customer get? Does the customer get your application is complete, an email or notice of some type like that?
They get notice from Elisa. They also get a receipt that the fees are paid. And maybe Elisa, can you mind hopping on here and kind of explaining to the mayor a little bit about your process when you receive a application or a plan?
Sure. So generally they give us the application. If it's a plan review application, as soon as I'm done processing it, I send them an email acknowledging that their application is complete for us to move forward. And also I send them a receipt stating and also state that their fees have been paid. And then we just go forward from there usually.
Okay, yeah, exactly what I was looking for is just, what is the document in writing that the customer receives? And what I heard you say is they'll get an email from you saying that the application is complete.
They would get an email, and they would also be informed as to which planner the case has been assigned to and provided their contact information.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, so, and of course we have established fees that the Board of Commissioners establish every year, sometimes even in the middle of the year. And as we go through every single budgetary process on an annual basis, we look and see to make sure that we are charging the fees that we think they should be, kind of based on our own work on various levels, and also what our peers are charging for this different type of work. Initiation of requests, unless otherwise specified for a particular request, all applications for consideration must be initiated by the affected property owner or an owner's authorized agent. So that's typically, we get either contacted by a property owner or a property owner's agent. Somebody else from somewhere else can't necessarily initiate a process for someone without acting as their agent.
Hey, Jeff,
Yes.
as we go through here, I just had made a little note if it's possible, and I know you and Blair have probably seen this, is maybe if we create a summary table for sections 3.2 through 3.7.
Yeah, we got that. We think that's a good suggestion. And we actually were able to make some of your smaller edits that you had provided to us a short time ago, but we just haven't been able to get to that one yet, but that's a great idea.
Well, I mean, no, I sent you an electronic with my comments, but let me know if you want me to add them in here so everyone else can hear them or not. I don't want to eat up too much time if, but I certainly don't mind giving you the feedback for the others to hear.
Okay, yeah, that's great. So the burden of proof. Burden to prove intent and compliance with the code rests fully on the applicant or the property owner. If the town determines that additional information is needed beyond that required as part of a standard application inspection or enforcement process, such additional information must be submitted. prior to full review and action in favor of the applicant or property owner. That is a very rare occurrence where we would need something above and beyond what would standard be needed. But of course, we would reserve the right to make that ask if we ever needed to. And of course, in any type of process, we ask that the applicant or their agent, and of course, it could be the applicant and their agent as well, must be present at any meeting required of this chapter. Files and records. A record of all zoning action shall be kept on file in the planning department. Such records may be kept electronically and available for inspection online, or maintained in paper form and available for review during normal business hours. And of course, we can provide copies through public records requests. Everybody's familiar with that. And of course, being able to get reimbursement for paper copies and things like that would be required.
Jeff?
Yes.
In ours here, under applicant required to be present, we have 2 paragraphs: withdrawal of an application and effect of a denial.
Yep, that was duplicate. That's actually also in the back part of chapter 3. So that's something we caught in what we typically do is before these meetings go live, we go back through and read back through them and do any edits that we see beforehand. And that was one that we found. So we went ahead and deleted out those paragraphs because they're duplicate later in this chapter.
Do you know what page that's on by chance?
It is on 38. It's section 3.5 and 3.6. So we're also saying straight off the top that traffic impact analysis is required. Of course, nothing really is more important in any of our requests nowadays, as it comes up all the time, as traffic. So we just want to make sure off the top that everybody understands all development uses, whether permitted by right, conditional zoning, special use, whatever it may be, shall be required to complete a traffic impact analysis if their development or use meets the criteria of the town's adopted TIA ordinance. And even if it doesn't meet the requirements of the TIA ordinance, we do want to reserve the right to require one if we see that that may be fit, depending on what the situation might be. And that's in the TIA ordinance now. So then we get into types of decisions. And this was a table that we added. We have our approval type, decision type, the decision maker, and then the approximate review time. So we've got a number of different permits that are issued. And so we thought, okay, instead of naming off every single type of permit that we have, and of course, sometimes they change, you might do away with one, you might add another one. We just decided to call them all administrative permits. And of course, those are approved by the zoning administrator or his or her designee. Typically, a review time for any administrative permit is going to be 30 days or less for any type of plot plan, which would typically be a plan for a single family house, could be a plan for an accessory structure. Most of those are in and out of here in a matter of days, sometimes even a matter of hours. You also have construction document plan review. So those would be a little bit more meaty reviews, such as Arby's, for example, as we used that before. Once they've gotten their legislative zoning approval or whatever it may be. In this case, it was back years ago with Prescott Village initially, but then they came back through and updated their conditional use permit. So they got their zoning approval. Then they got to what we call construction document plan review. They submitted those plans. They went through a review process that Elisa headed up. And I think within 2 or 3 technical review cycles, they were approved. So well within that 2 to 3 month review cycle. Then you have vested rights claims. That doesn't happen very often. I can't think of maybe a time or two in my entire career that anybody's made a formal vested rights claim, but it is a process that somebody can do, and we have a process for that one. Minor and exempt subdivision review, they're also administrative, the same timelines. So pretty much anything administrative that's not construction document view is going to be something that we strive to get in and out of this office as quickly as possible. Then you get into the legislative reviews, and these are the ones that you as the board are going to be a lot more familiar with, as you see these all the time. The first is a zoning text amendment, and that is typically a 2 to 3 month process, especially if initiated by somebody outside of our organization. Then you have a zoning map amendment, or better known as a rezoning process. That's 2 to 3 month process. So we typically require the application to be in 25 days prior to the planning board meeting. And so between that time of receiving the application, the build up to the planning board, and then coming before the Board of Commissioners is typically about 2 to 3 months, just depending on how the calendar falls. Then you have the much more lengthy process of conditional zoning. In our UDO now, we called it conditional district zoning, CD zoning. We're just changing the nomenclature of it just slightly to conditional zoning district. It's the same thing and the same process with pretty much the same timeline of five months. So that's a longer process. They typically have a preliminary plan that's involved with that we review ahead of time, making sure that it meets those requirements that you will see a little bit later on in this chapter. And hence, that's why you have that 5 month typical timeline. It usually doesn't get much shorter than that, and sometimes it can take considerably longer than that, depending on how long it takes them to get through plan review. So then you have major subdivision preliminary plat approvals, and that is also approved by the Board of Commissioners. That's typically a 2 to 3 month process. That's not a public hearing process, but it does go through technical review, which is why you have the 2 to 3 month process on that one as well. Then you've got the quasi judicial processes, special use permits, and then appeals and variances. Appeals and variances always are in the purview of the Board of Adjustment. Special use permits can be in the purview of the Board of Adjustment, or they can be with the elected officials. And of course, we're keeping the process the same here as with the elected officials. You'll notice, I mean, it's not really much different from a conditional use permit. For years and years and years, municipalities and counties use the terms conditional use permit, special use permit, special exceptions was another name that it was. And they were very similar processes, and it was very confusing to people, particularly the conditional use permit versus conditional zoning. So one of the things that happened with 160D is doing away with the names conditional use permit, special exceptions, special exemptions, anything like that. If you do the special use permit process, or if you do the quasi-judicial process, it is a special use permit, and that's the only thing that you can call it outside of a conditional zoning. Now, moving forward, what we would do as staff is we would encourage most people to do conditional zoning requests, but sometimes it might be appropriate or prudent for somebody to do a special use permit type request. An example could be, we'll say behind us here at Town Hall, you have the Food Lion Shopping Center, which has been forever a commercially approved zoning district. But if somebody wanted to come in and do something that required a permit, that required a special use permit, you'd have to go through the process for that particular leasable space to allow that there. And it doesn't seem like it would be really reasonable to request the whole parcel to go through a conditional zoning just to get a special use permit for one use. So on the flip side of that, if you have a conditional zoning process, you would want to encourage that at the initial process of any development, so that you would be able to review that site plan. And then after the fact, if anybody wanted to come in that required a special use permit, they would already be permitted to do so through the conditional zoning process. So it kind of takes away a little bit of a double jeopardy there. And I know some of this stuff can be confusing.
Hey, Jeff,
Yes.
can we go back to the TIA? Because I'm sorry, I'm working between a couple documents here and I had a question on that.
Sure can.
So sort of my comment was sort of at the end where it talks about the town reserves the right to require a TIA for developments that do not meet the requirements at the discretion of the town manager. And sort of my comment was, is that too subjective? I mean, should there be some sort of criteria, or I don't know, that just to me sounded too subjective.
Well, the TIA ordinance does have the criteria, and I don't know all of the criteria. Matt knows it all, but from what I understand is that it's 1,000 peak trips, during the peak hours of the early morning or the late afternoon rush hours, or 1,000 trips per day. That's what typically triggers a TIA to be done on any particular use. But the ordinance also allows for discretion, not from the town manager, but from the town engineer, if they deem that whatever use is being proposed still might need some type of review, he would have the discretion to do that. So that's why that's in there. So the criteria is already there, and those are the main 2 points, and there might be some others that I'm less familiar with, but if they don't meet either of those 2 main trigger points, then the town engineer would still have the discretion to require one if he saw fit.
I just want to make sure that that it won't be like a subjective decision whether they do require or don't require. And I did request the ordinance, and I know Blair forwarded that to me. I just haven't had an opportunity to read that just yet.
Well, I think when you get down to, once you're passing the criteria, in this case, the 100 peak trips or the 1,000 per day, and you would get into the subjective realm beyond that. And, I haven't known Matt to require any TIA for something that didn't meet the requirements, but it's not uncommon to reserve the right to do that if you find it to be necessary. So that's why we kept that in there.
And again, I'm just trying to think, as this document outlives all of us, and it's not necessarily aimed towards Matt or anything, but I just would want to make sure that it would not be too subjective. And then what happens, is there an appeal process into any of this? So if they deem that they needed a TIA for a particular thing, but the applicant does not, is there an appeal process, or do they have to comply?
There's an appeal process for everything. Yeah, there is. I mean, that'd be heard by the Board of Adjustment. We can look at that, though.
I mean, my big thing is I just wouldn't want anyone to come back and say, oh, well, they didn't like me and they're requiring me to do this work, or, they're not. I just don't want the town engineer to be put in a position where they would have that decision making and people accuse them that they're playing favorites or not. That's sort of where my concern would be.
Okay, got it. We'll talk to Matt about it and He's not online today. He's down in Florida today on some family matters, but I'll make sure I get up with him and we'll talk through it.
I mean, I'm not insinuating that that's what occurring, but I just, want to make sure that no one could ever come back and say, oh, you're being too subjective, or, you're friends with this person or that person type thing.
Yep, I understand. Thanks. So next we get into vested rights, and vested rights have been, I guess you would say, cleared up fairly substantially from what was in 160A. So they pretty much divide up vested rights into a few different categories in the statutes. And first you have administrative permits, and by statute, they expire 6 months after issuance unless work under the permit has commenced and once started is discontinued for a period of 12 months. So there's not a lot of wiggle room in the statutes with that one. It's pretty clear and in concrete. It's a little bit more wiggle room when you get into the next tier here, which is site-specific vesting plans. So these are special use permits, conditional zoning site plans, things like that. You actually can do anywhere between 2 years and 5 years is the window that they give you. We've chosen to keep it how it's been in the UDO in the past, and also seems to be kind of the typical time period that most of our peers have done it for years and years and years, and that's at 2 years. But one thing to keep in mind, and this is very clear now in the statutes, is that a multi-phased development, and that's defined as being a development that's 25 acres or more, and that is intended to be in more than one phase, they can actually be up to a period of 7 years. So that's a significant difference between what has been allowed statutorily up until the 160D comes into effect. And that would be, well, Millbridge would be one example of something like that. Obviously, a multi-phased site there that's well over 25 acres. They would have 7 years of of vesting. And one thing to know about vesting, it doesn't necessarily always mean that you have to be putting a shovel in the ground within those 2 years. What the statute says, and what a lot of codes say, that the magic words are substantial progress or something phased or phrased similarly in that way. And then usually that to a certain extent is up to the discretion of the zoning administrator. And that has happened here in Waxhaw in my time here on quite a number of occasions that I can think of. I mean, there's been, not that long ago, we had a builder that came in and had a subdivision approved like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, but had done nothing. They had not worked towards getting any construction document plans done, certainly haven't moved any dirt. And my determination was, well, of course, your vesting is run out, so you'd have to start over the process there. That happens. It's not uncommon for that to happen. And that has happened on several occasions since I've been here. Another example would be a plan that we are reviewing right now, which is for an office, a smallish office development off of Cuthbertson Road there behind Taco Bell. They got their approval a little over 2 years ago, but they contacted us well before their 2 years was up from the date of approval, said they've been working to produce their construction document plans, did the TIA and all that was required of it. and kept us abreast that they were moving forward with that. And so we deemed that to be substantial progress and let them turn in their plans for review to continue on in their process.
Jeff, just a break on just some cleanup on some language. I was looking down, I see you changed zoning to administrative. There's another zoning word in the third sentence. However, a zoning permit shall not expire. If you want to just catch that, Blair.
Could you point out what you mean again?
On, let's see, I'm looking up at one here.
After the 12 months.
After the 12 months, it says, however, a zoning permit shall not expire.
Oh, yeah, that's right, because we just changed that. Yeah, I'll take care of that.
All right, I was looking down. Sorry about that.
No. that's
Something
okay.
else just to add here is just the change from the numeric to the language of 12 months to 6 months. Are we going to use
Yeah.
numbers or letters?
We're using the standard English convention that if it's a single digit number, you write it out. Any double or more, you do it numerically. That's standard convention.
Okay, and then the other question or comment that I had is where these have some timelines, is there a way to maybe put that into some sort of a table or graphic to make it easier to visualize?
I think so, sure. We can do that.
Okay, so then we're at variances which do not constitute the site-specific vesting plan. So, the variance shall be obtained under its own separate pretense there. It shall not confer a vested right unless and until the necessary variance is obtained. Other local approvals, pretty much anything else, any other vested right obtained under this code not specifically mentioned shall expire 1 year after the effective date if the work is authorized by approval has not been substantially commenced. So a vested right shall begin on the effective date of local approval or such other date as the Board of Commissioners may stipulate in its approval, provided the effective date occurs earlier than the issuance of the permit. No work or activity authorized by an expired development approval establishing the vested right shall thereafter be performed until a new development approval has been granted. And we've got amendments to site-specific plans and approved site-specific vesting plan and its conditions may be amended with the approval of the owner and the town in one of the following ways. Any substantial modification must be reviewed and approved in the same manner as the original approval. If expressly approved by the BOC, an extension to the vested rights period may be granted concurrently. And then minor modifications may be approved by staff as authorized by this code. No extension of the vested right shall be granted as part of a minor modification. Following approval or conditional approval of a statutory vested right, the town may take subsequent reviews and require subsequent approvals to ensure compliance. Conditions and forfeiture or site-specific vesting plan may be approved with terms and conditions as may reasonably be necessary to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. Revocation, the town may revoke development approval and any associated statutory vested right for failure to comply with the applicable terms or conditions. Then we've got a few exceptions. Once established in accordance, a vested right precludes any zoning action by the town that would change, alter, impair, prevent, diminish, or otherwise delay the development or use the property as set forth in an approved vested right. The establishment of a vested right through approval of a site-specific vesting plan shall not preclude the application of overlay zoning or other development regulation that imposes additional requirements but does not affect the allowable type or intensity of use. It's all standard type stuff. The establishment of a vested right under this chapter shall not preclude, change, or impair the authority of the town to adopt and enforce development regulation provisions governing non-conforming situations or uses. And we'll get into that chapter hopefully a little bit later, later today. And a vested right obtained is not a personal right, but shall attach to and run with the applicable property regardless of ownership. Now, we said that way back in chapter 1, 2, but felt that that needed to be said again early on in chapter 3. So we've got the administrative decisions here. First one is a vested rights claim. And as we went back to the table, that is something that somebody can do and typically can be done within a 30-day process. We have administrative permits. Permit required. No land shall be excavated, filled, paved, used, or occupied, and no building hereafter structurally altered, erected, moved, used, or its use changed until a permit has been issued, stating that the requested activity complies with the provisions of this code. No permit shall be issued except in conformity with the code. We try to explain a little bit about the type of permits that we have. They include all permits and approvals pertaining to zoning, subdivision, engineering, transportation, stormwater, erosion control, floodplain, and other similar permits required by the town to assist staff with the day-to-day administration of the code. It does not pertain to permits required by Waxhaw building inspections for compliance with the state of North Carolina building code. A complete application, we state this again, is required prior to any review or decision regarding a permit request. A complete application is one that includes all materials required for submittal, all applicable fees, along with sufficient information to determine the intent to fully comply with the applicable requirements of the code. So then we get into plot plan review. No administrative permit shall be issued on a single-family detached lot without completion of a plot plan review. So what this would be is, let's give the example of Grove Manor. They're an approved subdivision. They have their final plat that they've recorded. So they are selling lots out in Grove Manor right now. And somebody, one of the builders out there is looking to get a permit for lot number 1. So they submit to the town what is called a plot plan that shows the location of that house on that plan. So that's what a plot plan is. And of course, we look at that and make sure that it meets all the requirements of the code, the setback requirements, built upon area, all that good stuff.
Hey,
So
Jeff,
yes.
under here, the administrative permits, all these different A, B, C, D, E, F, all the way to H. Is there a way that you could maybe, I don't want to say a table or a checklist or something, because they all are everything that's sort of required. I don't know, just some sort of, I'm a visual graphic type person.
You mean under the types of permits, the zoning, subdivision, engineering?
But it's almost like you need a permit, and then you have to have the conformity, and then you need the type of permit, the application, you need a plot plan review, a construction document, and a certificate of compliance.
Yeah, you need a lot.
Those would all be like part of a checklist to be able to do that, isn't it not? Are
Yeah,
those all the
we have,
requirements that you need?
We have checklists that we do provide them that are separate from the code. But we can make it into more of a graphic representation if you think that would be easier to read a little better.
It would for me.
Okay.
Yeah, you're talking about a process diagram that would outline this. Correct?
Yes.
Yeah, no problem.
Blair's got the process diagrams down now.
I've given them a lot to work on.
Right.
Yeah, we've honed the process of process diagrams here.
So the plot plan shall be a survey of the lot depicting the proposed building or structure, all the proposed setbacks, the percentage of built upon area. The requirement for a survey as part of the plot plan may be waived if it's determined there's enough information to deem the survey unnecessary. But still, it has to be a legible plan if the survey is deemed not to be necessary.
Hey, Jeff,
Yes.
accessory structures, would that include a shed?
All I heard was accessory structures and then you cut off.
Let's say shed.
Would that include like a shed for an accessory structure, or
Yes.
all sheds? Is it based on a particular size?
No, it's not. It would be any accessory structures would be sheds are a very common example. Somebody that wants to do a detached garage is another common one that that we get. Those are probably the two most common.
Wouldn't that necessarily fall under the under 12-foot square rule?
If it falls under the under 12 foot, it doesn't require a building permit, but it still would require zoning.
Okay, if we could make that more clear somewhere, because I know that there's been a few, even in my neighborhood, that have gone that route. I'm not sure what their process was, but a couple of them had permits because they were bigger than that size. But I'm not sure, I'm not sure that I understood that they had to still go through a plot plan review.
Okay, we can make sure that's delineated. Yeah, the North Carolina Building Code doesn't require permits for buildings that have more square footage. I think it's 144 square feet, which is the 12 feet in any one side that you reference. But on the zoning side, I mean, we still require setbacks from the property lines of 5 feet. That's really the main thing that we're looking at for accessory structures, no matter what size they are. And, you know, they can be very small, and some of them can be quite sizable, just depending on what a particular property owner needs are. But we can be happy to make sure that that is specifically mentioned in the code.
Appreciate that. I think it's just confusing to somebody who isn't in the business and would look at it and say, well, gee, there's no permit required, and, you know, under 12 feet. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. So next we have construction document plan reviews. So, and these are going to be required for single family attached, multifamily, mixed use, and non-residential developments or redevelopments. So the contents required, they shall submit plans. They have to be completed by a professional engineer licensed in the state of North Carolina for construction document plan review. And then, of course, here we mention again, which we can check on the warranted part, the traffic impact analysis. We require those as we always do for any one of these submittals. TRC, Technical Review Committee comments. Staff shall distribute the construction document plans for review and comment. Construction document plans will be approved once the applicant meets all requirements of the code. Construction document plans must be administratively approved prior to commencement of work on the site. So, and as I think I've maybe mentioned before, how the TRC works. So, you know, back to our Arby's example, when Elisa received those plans, and she was the planner in charge of that review, she sends the digital copy of the plans that we receive out to the technical review committee, which I don't know what the distribution is up to now, but it's like 38 or 40 different people. A lot of them are a part of Union County. They can be Union County Public Works, Union County Public Health, Union County Planning is a few examples from there that get a look. Duke Energy, Union Power. A lot of those agencies get them so that they get an idea of what might be coming, and so they know how to plan to potentially serve that. The school facilities manager, particularly if it's residential, will always get the plan. And there's a number of other ones too, and they'll look at the plan and provide us comments back if they have any. A lot of them won't necessarily. Duke Energy rarely, if ever, has any comments for us about anything, but Union County typically has a lot, particularly water and sewer related things like that. And so those are incorporated by Elisa along with our internal review, which is planning, engineering, etc. She'll compile all of the comments into kind of a one-stop shop to send it back to whoever the applicant is, so that they can take those and make the edits, make the updates that they see fit. So when we send out a plan to the technical review committee, I believe the review time is, we give them 3 weeks to review it and give back their comments. We compile them, send them back to the engineer, whoever that is. And of course, they take whatever time they want to, short or long, to revise the plans, get it back to us, and we go through the process again. Typically 2 or 3 reviews is all it takes. That's about the average. Rarely is somebody going to submit us a perfect construction document plan on the first time. I don't think that's ever happened. Sometimes people can get approved through the second process, but typically it's the third. But occasionally some take a lot longer. And I think with our record right now is an 11th review is one that has been going on, which is very rare. As I said, most are in about the 3, but occasionally someone comes along that takes a lot longer for whatever reason.
Jeff?
Yes.
So is there a way under the technical review committee that we can put something of who this gets sent to? And the reason why is that if we use this document in the future, that we can reference this to anyone who has a question saying that we didn't consult with the schools or we didn't consult with NCDOT. I would like to have something listed, however you guys see fit, of like, who are the members and what makes up a technical review committee? What agencies or examples of the agencies that we send things to?
I think Jeff is headed there right now. It's at the end of chapter 2.
Is there a way that we can incorporate that right under that section somewhere as well?
Yes, we can. So what we've got here, this is chapter 2.
Or a hyperlink back to this section, because I just, I know that we do that and we get the input from all these different agencies and organizations, but when we're approving something and people think, well, you're not taking into consideration NCDOT or the schools, or it's going to overload the schools, I want to be able to say, no, this is part of the process that we do.
So this is what we have written now. It's section 2.6, technical review committee is established to assist town planning with review of plans, particularly when the plans require review from organizations outside of the town. This committee is a review body only and has no decision-making powers or duties. It shall be the responsibility of the planning staff to determine when plans should be forwarded to TRC for technical review. Now I've got organizations included, but not limited to, and I've listed NCDOT, Duke Energy, Union Power, Piedmont Natural Gas, Waxhaw Volunteer Fire Department, Union County Planning, Public Works, Public Health, and Schools. So that's how we have it. And I could certainly reference that in chapter 3, reference back to section 2.6 here, if you think that's appropriate.
I think that'd be good.
Okay, great.
Or see definitions in chapter 2.6 or however you think.
Okay, we'll do that. Okay, so we're down to certificate of compliance. So no structure or land hereafter erected, altered, or changed in use shall be used or occupied until it has been issued a certificate of compliance. So, and whereas issuance of a permit indicates an applicant has successfully proven the intent to comply, a certificate is intended to indicate that on the date of issuance, following any change or alteration, the property does comply to the best of the zoning administrator's knowledge. So an example of how this would work, well, for the Arby's example, it's being built now, but when they finish their building project, they will call us when they're ready to get a final inspection for zoning compliance. We will go out there at that time, and we do go out there periodically during the building process too, to see how they're doing. But when they're ready to get their zoning compliance, we go out there and we are basically looking to make sure that it meets all the requirements of the code all the requirements that have been approved on the site plan so that they have the proper amount of parking, they have the proper amount of landscaping, that, you know, everything is right on the plan as they initially proposed. If there's any issues with landscaping as far as it not being the right time of year to plant things, then it's properly bonded, things like that in order to get the compliance. So that's how that process would work. Assuming that they, everything looked good there on the ground, when we go out there and review it, we would issue the certificate of compliance.
Jeff,
Yes.
the issue that I have is proven the intent to comply. Shouldn't they be complying? And intent, just I can intend to do anything I want to do, but shouldn't they be complying?
Okay, the second sentence there, whereas issuance indicates the applicant has successfully proven the intent to comply. Well, that's a good point. We'll strike intent.
Maybe just has proven to comply.
Proven to comply, yes. We'll make that change. So, and back to the 1 year thing there, if work hasn't substantially begun, you know, substantial progress, going back to that nomenclature there for vesting. Then we've got subdivision plat approval, which we see chapter 5 for details, which we've already been through that chapter about the subdivision review and submittal process. So then we get into the stuff that you're going to be more familiar with is the legislative decisions. Pre-application meeting is required. It's required for all legislative decision requests. The purpose is to allow staff to gather information about the project proposal and its merits and to inform the potential applicant on the requirements and processes. No application will be processed without completing a pre-application meeting. So yeah, what that means is we wouldn't accept an application. Rarely, as I mentioned before, does anybody ever attempt to walk in the door with an application without first inquiring as to what the process would be, what the requirements would be. And that's really the point of the pre-application, is to just give them a lay of the land, really give them some advice on how we feel that their proposal would go through the process, what the timelines are, all of that good stuff that you typically talk with somebody about if they're interested in developing a property. Then we get into the neighborhood meeting requirements. Neighborhood meeting is required as part of all conditional zoning and special use permit requests. Such meeting shall occur prior to any recommendation by the planning staff and at least 30 days prior to the planning board meeting. All this pretty much is the same as it stands now in the current UDO. There's really nothing different here. The neighborhood meeting is designed to provide an opportunity for community involvement from parties that may have an interest in a conditional zoning or special use permit request. And of course, we were doing it now in the UDO for conditional district zonings and conditional use permit requests. So the same thing.
Jeff?
Yes.
I have a quick question on this. You and I have both heard sometimes people in the neighborhood saying that they were never notified of something that's going to happen within their mailing district. So you have a neighborhood meeting requirement. You do what we're supposed to do. We send out the notices, but nobody shows up to the neighborhood meeting. Is that still deemed a neighborhood meeting satisfaction?
Yes, it is. And we've had that issue comes up more often than you think. Now we do have, we have instances where you have a lot of people show up, like over there when we got a request for the 6-acre property adjacent to Alma Village there. That neighborhood meeting had about 75 people show up. But on the flip side, you can also get virtually no one, or in some cases, nobody except for the engineer or the applicant and whichever planner is in charge. And that has happened too here in Waxhaw during my time. The Valvoline request That was myself, Madison, and the engineer pretty much sat for 2 hours without a single person coming by to discuss that project. So that does happen as well. And if that happens, then that is deemed a complete neighborhood meeting, regardless of how many people show up.
Jeff,
Yes.
follow up with that. So we've got here 300 feet from the exterior boundaries, the proposed development. Is there a way to expand that? Just to follow up with what the mayor said, that always happens where the people say, oh, we weren't notified, and only people on the other side of the property were notified, and so on and so forth. So is there a way to expand that to 600 feet? And over here, do we talk about the possibility of having these meetings and these notices posted on social media?
I think you can expand it. I don't think there's a limit to it by statute. I'll have to check that to be sure, but I think you can make it whatever we would deem to be a reasonable distance. I think that is definitely within our purview.
I think part of the problem was folks on one side of the roadway were notified, but the folks on the other side of the roadway felt that they should have also been notified. I believe it's Rehoboth Road and some of the side streets in the neighborhood. So a way to help with that is maybe expand the area to be reached. And also, for example, if there's a subdivision on the other side of that roadway, is it just within the 300 or 600 feet or whatever we decide? Is that just the number of people that are going to get notified, or will the entire subdivision that happens to be on the other side of, let's say, a roadway or a property, will they also get notified?
It would not be an entire subdivision. It would only be the portion of the subdivision that is within the 300 feet. So to my knowledge, what is required statutorily is for anybody that is considered adjacent. And what that means is anybody that physically touches the property, or if they don't physically touch it, is separated by a right of way, like a street right of way. I think that's what's statutorily required. Now this process here, the conditional zoning, goes above and beyond that. And we require that anybody that is within 300 feet. So that is, I think, above and beyond what the state statutes require. But I don't think it necessarily has to be limited to 300 feet. So your suggestion would be 600?
At the very least, and a way to, again, put it out on social media. And for example, if we had just a southern tip or however it breaks down to a subdivision, I don't think it should be just the, let's say, for argument's sake, a row of 5 houses within, let's say, Millbridge, and then the rest of Millbridge has no idea what's going on. I think it's important to reach the entire cluster, or at the very least make an effort to reach their HOA or something that puts that information out, so that we don't have the ongoing, people saying that, well, they weren't notified. Oh, the sign by the property was so small I couldn't read it. They were just trying to hide it. They put it behind a tree. They put it behind a bush. I'm looking to be as out in your face. This is what's happening, transparent, whatever you want to call it, but get us to a point where we can minimize the amount of people saying, well, I didn't know.
I think that, to the HOA, I think that's a reasonable thing to do. I guess with the Millbridge example, Millbridge example is a lot different than, say, a Kensington Park example. I think Kensington Park is maybe 20 lots or something like that, but Millbridge is almost 2,000. And so if you had a rezoning request that is along Kensington Road and you notified all of Millbridge, you'd have some part of Millbridge, of course, is way down near NC 75, so a completely opposite area of town. I don't think it would be, in my opinion, necessary to notify property owners in the southern part of Millbridge for something going on in Kensington, but I do think I think it would be a good suggestion to notify the HOA, and then they can distribute that out if they see fit. along with if we wanted to up it from 300 feet to something larger, I think that would be appropriate too.
That's my suggestion.
Can
Okay.
I just interject for one moment? I don't think even by statute that we are required to notify a whole or entire community based upon statutorily, if we are covering what we need to do, and if you notify the HOA, then that, I think that that would be sufficient. But to try and notify the entire community, the signs are posted, the information is out there, the HOA can be notified, but by law, we are doing what we are governed and by right we have to do. So even if you extend it to 400, 500, 600, I think that that should satisfy everyone, because there are postings, there's information that's out there, there are signs, and that covers it.
Okay, thank you, Brenda. I think from what I've heard, I think the best thing to do here is to add in that we would send it to the HOA, whatever the HOA PO box is, or however that gets out, to make sure that, of course, then they would have the ability to distribute that if they saw fit, above and beyond what we would already require for our normal adjoining property requirements.
Jeff?
Yes.
My whole thing too here under section I is I think we really need to cite North Carolina general statutes here, because I'm assuming, you know, we're not making this up. We're citing the actual general statutes from North Carolina. So I think we need to cite that someplace in here, that this is what's required by law. Not that Waxhaw is saying this, but it's by North Carolina law. The other part to do too is I had comments about this whole section is making it a process diagram, and then something to emphasize the neighborhood meeting part, whether it's delineated through different colors or something, but something that we can emphasize the public comment or input opportunities in that, so that the public would understand, or people could understand that's their opportunity to provide their comments and feedback to us. And I think that's what I have at the moment.
Yeah, the process diagram is a good suggestion, and we were actually talking about that briefly before the meeting started, and so we'll have that ready when we go back through the final edits. That's a very, very good suggestion, and for a process, I know that a lot of these the processes are hard. It's a lot of words, and so I think that's good suggestions to try to make as many of these processes into some type of diagram or table or whatever it may be. I think would be very helpful.
I just want for some clarity along this line here. We're making a pretty clear departure off of the requirement. And I want to make sure that all of the board members have consensus on what that change should be. The requirement, if I understand it right, Jeff, it's still at 300 feet?
I don't think the neighborhood requirement is even or the conditional zoning requirement is at 300 feet. I think that already goes above and beyond what the statutes say. I think the statutes say it's just adjoining property and leave it at that. I can't say I know that off the top of my head. I can certainly look at that to see for sure, but I think that the 300 feet is above and beyond that, and that's just language that we're taking from the UDO. I do think that in the case of those type of requests, that's not unreasonable for a distance requirement. I mean, that's just my own opinion, but I don't think that's in the statutory requirements for it to be that way, but we'll have to check that out.
All right, if we could look at that and review it before we go ahead and affix a number to it, let's review that first and then see if we can amendment. I'm not necessarily opposed to beyond the 300 feet, but I want to understand the impact of it as well.
I'll see if I can find that during our break, see if I can locate that quickly and we can come back to it.
Jeff, just the other question, and I know here it talks about notifying people within 300 feet. Does that matter? Because I know like the development down off Rehoboth, like all the surrounding parcels were zoned in the county as opposed to the municipal town limits. So does that change of governance make any difference?
No, not in our eyes. Whether or not they were in the town or in the county, we would still send out adjoining property notices, no matter if they were in the town or not.
Well, let us be a little bit facetious since we're having fun with that. So if I'm up against the North Carolina state line, do they get noticed?
Yes.
Right?
But
If
they
I could
get
just
notice
skip-
not, but that notice that they receive is not due to statute. It's just due to what we put in our own ordinance.
I don't know what it says for interstate. I'll have to look at that one too. I don't know if they give an example of that in the state statute. I think what our attorney would say is that, when in doubt, you always send something out, and that's pretty much been my mantra. So, if you have a situation where you're kind of on the fence of whether you need to send out an adjoining property letter or not, it's always in your best interest to go ahead and send it out just to cover yourself. That's really how the best way to operate, I think, in that sense. So we typically operate by, regardless of whether you're in the town. So you might have a piece of property that is adjoining the town of Marvin per se. Like if we had a rezoning request at the intersection of Bonds Grove Church Road and NC 16, we would send the letters out to not only the people within the town of Waxhaw that would adjoin that, but also the property that's across the street that's in the town limits of Marvin, and the properties, I think, to the east of there or northeast of there, that would be in county jurisdiction as well.
I think Tracy had a comment as well. Tracy, you have a comment?
Well, I just wanted to give my input since you're talking about consensus on that. I'm kind of more in line with Mayor Pro Tem McMillan, sticking more with what's statutorily required, just to better protect the town. As like you said, contacting the HOA seems to be enough that if an entire neighborhood would have concern over something, that would be more on them to communicate to their neighborhood rather than the town being held liable for that.
Just to jump in on that, should the town take the responsibility and the potential liability to have to notify the HOA? I mean, that opens us up to, if we put it in the ordinance, I mean, that's a nice to do to be able to do that, but do we want to have that actually in our ordinance requiring us to do that?
Well, so this particular section is the neighborhood meeting section. And so the onus is entirely on the applicant to send out all of that stuff. And so in that section, yes, I think that would be appropriate. Now, maybe where your concern might be more valid is when we get down to the actual conditional zoning or special use permit, where then the onus turns back to us to make sure that we're sending out the public notices properly, things like that. Then yeah, that they're, that would fall on us to make sure that a notice went out to whichever HOA or HOAs that would be subject to that particular request. So that could be a concern. I'll do a little bit more research on it, and maybe I can, in the 15-minute break or so that we take here soon, see what I can find then. And then if not, then we can follow back up on it afterwards.
Well, I think that'd be appropriate. I think, courtesy, like say, is one thing. I don't want to put us in the crosshairs for any responsibility that we shouldn't ordinarily take on. So let's check that out before we make that final call.
Yep, that makes sense. So here are some of the noticing requirements, outside of that have a sign posted on the property not less than 10 days prior to the meeting. The sign shall indicate the date, time, and location. It shall cover the following topics: introduction of the meeting organizer, support staff, description of the proposed project, input from attendees on the proposed project, and then explanation of how the comments made will be used moving forward. Typically, how you see them is in the agenda packet. You'll see some type of review or minutes that were from that meeting, and that's how you have it presented to you in your packet when you're reviewing a conditional zoning request, for example. The applicant provides a written summary, and they'll prove that they've done the following, provided us with an attendance list. They've done the mail notices, whatever the issues were that came up out of the meeting, any concerns, questions, anything feedback related that can be helpful in decision making. We require that. Detailed summary of the applicant's response to the feedback, and then any revisions based on the feedback, which typically happen more often than not. By the time you see a site plan, there's something on there that's been addressed from a result of a neighborhood meeting almost all the time. Can't say that all the time, but usually there's something that's been adjusted based on something that happened at the neighborhood meeting. So then we've got our amendment procedures. Start that off by the statutory required statement of consistency and reasonableness. So when adopting or rejecting any amendment, the BOC shall approve a brief statement. You all are well aware of that, so don't necessarily have to go into detail of that. So they can be approved. 160D expressly says that they can be approved now in a single statement if we choose to do so. So that's just something to note and point out if we want to start doing that moving forward.
Jeff, I've got just one comment. I looked down and you were already moving forward. I'm going to go back up to number 3 on that, where it talks about the applicant will provide the town a written summary of the neighborhood meeting. And then I want to drop down to 05 there. And so must include site plan revisions based on the feedback. I'm not sure that I understand who's leading the pack on that one. So what this looks to say is that whatever the comments are, the site plan will be revised. I don't think that that's what we intend, or you tell me different.
Okay, well, yeah, if it reads that way, that's not really the intent. I mean, the intent is for the developer or applicant to be able to work with the neighborhood folks, and if there are any revisions that need to be made, then they would be made that way. So if it reads that way to you, then we probably should look at revising that a little bit. So if there were any revisions to be made based on the developer amicably working with the neighborhood folks to do that, that was the intent of what that would read.
Well, I'd rather see it. Certainly the neighborhood can give comment, but I think the reasonableness side comes in between the applicant and the zoning administrator.
Yep.
So if we could just take a look at that to make sure that it isn't conveyed that whatever a group of neighborhood people want, that's going to be the requirement.
Agreed. That's not the intent of how that should read, so we'll make sure we revise that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So after the consistency and reasonableness, we've got how you initiate any amendments. So the following can be initiated, or the following can initiate any requests: the Board of Commissioners, the Planning Board, planning staff, or property owners or their authorized agents. Now, more often than not, it's going to be a property owner or their agent that makes a request. Sometimes it would be the board, if you wanted us to look into something to revise in the code. Maybe occasionally the planning board and planning staff, but usually it's going to be initiated by a property owner or their authorized agent. This is another statutory requirement. If the planning board does not make a recommendation within 30 days, then the BOC may act on the amendment without a planning board recommendation. But the planning board does reserve the right to continue a consideration to a subsequent meeting or date if they determine additional information is needed, but that subsequent meeting must be less than 30 days after their initial consideration, unless it is agreed to in person by the applicant at the meeting at which the continuation is announced and incorporated into the written record. Public hearings. Board of Commissioners shall conduct a public hearing to give interested parties the opportunity to speak for or against the amendment. The public hearing shall be conducted and notice of hearing shall be in conformity with the requirements of 160D. After the public hearing has been conducted, the Board of Commissioners shall approve or deny the application for the amendment, either at the same meeting as the public hearing was conducted or at the next regularly scheduled Board of Commissioners meeting. So there's no requirement that we do the process that we have continued to do where you review or have the public hearing and then do the final decision at the following meeting. That's just been our standard practice and policy. And of course, we can continue to do that if we want to. But I've set it up where we would be able to continue it on as the way we've always done it, or also have the option to approve something right after the public hearing if we deem fit, which we technically have the option to do now, with, I guess, the caveat that we can't do that during virtual hearings because you have to have the 24-hour period done after comment period after a public hearing. So that does put it into the realm of having to be in the meeting after the public hearing, at least while we're still doing virtual meetings. So the Board of Commissioners may revise a proposed text amendment if they determine such action is appropriate based on the review, based on the planning board's recommendation and planning staff's analysis. So really what this says, the board always has the discretion to revise any type of text amendment, from the beginning of the process all the way through to the very end, right before you vote. If there's something that you want to have changed or something that you want to see differently, you have the ability to do that. So the BOC may revise a proposed conditional zoning if they determine such action is appropriate based on their reviews, pretty much saying the same thing. And then the BOC reserves the right to continue their consideration of an amendment to a subsequent meeting, date and time certain if they determine that there's additional information needed. Of course, you don't do that very often, if at all. Don't think that that you've done that for any specific rezoning requests, at least since I've been here, but always reserve the right to do that. So then here's a process chart that we created for zoning map and zoning text amendments. So it shows the pre-application meeting, application received, which is 30 days prior to the planning board. Then you go into the staff review period, planning board review period, and then ultimately and finally the Board of Commissioners. So the zoning map amendments, they shall be in writing and filed to the zoning administrator, and they'll be considered complete when the following conditions are met. Applicable fees are paid, application is filled out and signed, and then a pre-application meeting has been completed. The additional application requirements, providing a list of all property owners adjoining the proposed map amendment. Adjoining shall mean all parcels that physically touch the subject parcels, as well as parcels that would physically touch the subject property, if not separated from the subject parcel by a street, railroad, or other transportation corridor.
Jeff?
Yes.
You have separated by transportation. What about if it's a creek or a body of water or something other than transportation?
Well, typically, if it's separated by a creek, that would still be on private property because that's not a That's not a right of way typically. So that's why it's worded that way. So next we have large scale rezonings. So this is for rezonings that would require a notice to more than 50 property owners. So that allows you to do notices by, not necessarily sending out, 6,000 letters to all property owners within the town, for example. So there's a process for that we would have to follow. And that's in statute 160D and specifically in 202B. Completed applications must be received a minimum of 30 days prior to the planning board meeting. The planning board shall consider the application for the map amendment and make a recommendation to approve or deny the map amendment. So this is a little bit different than what we require in the UDO. Right now in the UDO, we require 25 days, but we're upping that to 30 days, adding 5 days just to make it a little bit more consistent with all of our other reviews, and typically go in more of the month timelines as opposed to the days timelines. Zoning text amendments. Applications for text amendments shall be in writing and filed with the zoning administrator, considered complete if the applicable fees are paid, application is filled out, pre-application meeting has been completed, and the proposed text to be amended accompanies the application. And this too must be received a minimum of 30 days prior to the planning board meeting. The planning board would consider the application and make a recommendation to approve or deny. And the planning board certainly has the ability to revise the proposed text amendment if they determine appropriate based on planning staff's analysis. And the applicant must agree to any revised language prior to the vote on the recommendation. And then ultimately the recommendation is forwarded to the BOC for BOC review and approval. And I think, Mayor, conditional zoning, that might be a lengthy discussion topic. So it might be good, since it's about 2:25, to go ahead and take our break.
Saved by the bell. Let's take a break, for 15 minutes?
That sounds good.
Very good. So we'll reconvene back at 2:40. All right, we have a couple of stragglers there and a couple of them need a couple more minutes. So just sit tight and we'll start up again in a couple of minutes. All right, Jeff, I think we're all in, everybody back in. I think I see everybody's face. Floor is yours again.
All right, thank you, Mayor. So I have pulled up the statute as I know it in 160D. This is 160D 602, notice of hearing on proposed zoning map amendments. And this goes over it all. And this is where it defines abutting, as we talked about in the language that I took, separated by street, railroad, or other transportation corridor. We've got the 10 days, but not 25 days prior. So the owners of affected parcels of land and all parcels of land abutting that parcel shall be mailed a notice of the hearing on a proposed zoning map amendment by first-class mail at the last address listed for such owners on the county tax abstracts. Of course, then it explains what abutting means. And this, what I mentioned before, was the optional notice for large-scale zoning map amendments. Then the posted notice, which is where you put something, place it on the property, and which we already do. And then it goes over the actual notice, making sure that a notice actually goes to the owner of the property if they are not part of the process for whatever reason, but with our case, they would be. Down here at the bottom, it talks about optional communication requirements. When a zoning map amendment is proposed, a zoning regulation may require communication by the person proposing the map amendment to neighboring property owners and residents, and may require the person proposing the zoning map amendment to report on any communication with neighboring property owners and residents. So that the neighborhood meeting stuff, to me, as I suspected, falls into this category of optional communication requirements. So it's, I guess you would call it kind of standard zoning protocol, where a lot of ordinances for your more complex requests, like a conditional zoning request, do have the neighborhood meeting requirements. And those stem from this paragraph here, is where they are actually an optional communication requirement, but not required by state law. I don't think there's any other section, but that's, we can continue to look to be 100% sure, but I think that's, this is the only section in 160D that I'm familiar with that talks about notices of hearings and such. Now let's get back to where we were. Conditional zoning districts, and they are map amendments. Reserved for situations where a particular use or a mix of uses, when properly planned and cited, may be appropriate for a specific site. So remember way back when we were reviewing chapter 4, where you have the base zoning districts, and then you also have conditional zoning districts. And of course, you're very familiar with these type of requests, as you've probably seen these requests more than just about anything, particularly in recent years. So uses which may be considered for a conditional zoning district are restricted to those uses permitted in the corresponding general zoning district table. So, you know, what that means is that you go to the permitted use table, and if something is not a permitted use in one zoning district, they can't get a conditional zoning for that, is what that means.
Jeff, just a note real quick. On my book, it shows, I'm on my page 31, it shows section 334 as zoning text amendments. The next page, on page 32, it shows section 334 as conditional zoning districts. Do we want to renumber that?
Let's see here. So in the one that you got, 334, yeah, I see that. Ah, okay, yep, we just got to adjust the number. We'd have 2 section 334s. Thank you for catching that.
So would we say that it conditional zoning becomes 335?
I think so. So we've got 333, assuming everything's correct up above. Then zoning
Following it as well
would be 334. And then conditional zoning would be 335. Let's scoot down here. See.
And you might want to scope around to anywhere else that might reference 334, that should reference 335.
Well, for instance, the conditional district rezoning procedure diagram, I'll change that as well, the figure.
Yeah, that's where it really stinks, is if you get the numbering wrong and then you got to go back and fix all the referencing. That's no fun, but it happens.
Search and destroy, right?
That's right.
How I spend my day.
So let's see, additional procedures required. In addition to the general procedures, we have some specific criteria that are required for part of conditional zoning requests and approvals. And they are as follows. Certain additional approvals may be unnecessary. A conditional zoning district will preclude an applicant from having to obtain a special use permit if the conditional zoning district as approved by the BOC includes uses that are classified as a special use in the table of permitted uses. So, you know, if somebody comes, the point is so that if somebody's getting a master plan and they're getting it approved, say for a mixed use type shopping center, the idea would be for them to get all of those approvals in one fell swoop instead of having to come back and get, say, a special use permit for one leasable shopping space. That's what that's trying to prevent.
But it doesn't preclude them necessarily from a change in the future.
That's correct, because you might have a situation where you have well, like here, like we have now, I mentioned before in the Food Lion Shopping Center, if we happen to have in the waning days here of our UDO, if we had somebody that came along that wanted to put a use in one of these spaces and it required a conditional use permit, well, you know, the only way to do that is to go through that process for that lease space, unless you wanted to do a conditional zoning for the entire parcel, which would seem unnecessary for one user that wanted to be in one space. So that's what we're trying to cover and prevent from happening when we can on the front end. So the deadline for submission is 90 days prior to the planning board meeting. And As you remember before, that's why this is a 5-month process, and we give ourselves a full 3 months for site plan review prior to the planning board meeting. That typically gives us enough time to review the plan through technical review up to 3 times. And that we typically need every bit of that time to do it. And then sometimes it even goes longer than that. But the typical process is about 5 months. Conditions may be applied. Specific conditions may be proposed by the applicant or the town, but only those conditions mutually agreed to by the applicant and the town may be incorporated into an approval. Conditions imposed shall be limited to those that address conformity of the development and use of the site to this code, potential impacts of the proposed rezoning on adjacent and nearby properties, public facilities or infrastructure in conformity with adopted plans. The applicant must agree to these conditions in writing. If the applicant is unable to submit a written agreement at the meeting prior to approval, approval of a conditional zoning district will be conditioned on receipt of such written agreement within 15 days from the date of approval. Failure to submit the written agreement in the time required will render a rezoning null and void. And so this is all kind of standard stuff. You know, whenever we have somebody that comes through with this type of request, we have what we call initially, as we're going through the review, what we call the staff proposed conditions. As we're going through the review, we will submit that to the applicant, and then through the process, you know, they will we'll work through those and then get to a point to where the applicant would agree to those conditions. And that's typically, we get to that point before it goes on to a report and before it's sent to the board. And occasionally those conditions can be adjusted and certainly can be during a meeting. Though I don't think that's happened, at least in my time here, but it certainly happened on several occasions in my history before, as long as the applicant agrees to those conditions. That's the caveat by state law, is that any conditions have to be agreed upon by the applicant. Site plan is required. Applications shall be accompanied by a site plan. It shall be reviewed within that 90-day time frame prior to planning board. It's up to the planning staff to distribute the site plan to the TRC and comment if deemed necessary. So this is the information that is required as part of a conditional zoning district review. Some basic stuff here: name, address, email, phone number of property owner, and the tax parcel number of a property. You know, some of this stuff like this sounds kind of silly and mundane, but you might be surprised at how many site plans that we potentially or sometimes get that don't have some of this basic information. And our first review of it will be that, hey, you need to provide, you don't have the property owner's address, or you don't have the vicinity map or something like that. There always seems to be missing something, usually unintentionally.
And that brings me to a squirrel moment again. We talked in one of the prior sessions about getting the owner's permission for the town to enter the property. Do we have that written back in anywhere, Blair? You got to unmute there, Blair.
I don't know off the top of my head. I'll have to look for it.
Again, we just want to make sure, and I had this conversation with the planning board chair about having all the planning board members, when an applicant comes in, especially on a subdivision or something, that they boots on the ground, they walk the property so they know what they've got.
Yeah, we can incorporate that in if we haven't already. We'll make note of that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So a boundary survey and vicinity map showing the property's total acreage, zoning districts, general location, adjoining streets, railroads, waterways, graphic scale, north arrow, the existing and proposed topography at 2-foot contour intervals, owner's name and addresses, tax parcel numbers, and existing land uses of all adjoining properties, proposed use of all land and buildings or structures, including the number of residential units if applicable, proposed number and location of all buildings and their approximate area and their approximate exterior dimensions to include height of all structures, a description of all screening and landscaping required by this code and any additional screening and landscaping proposed by the applicant, all existing easements, reservations, right-of-ways, proposed phasing, if any, an approximate completion time for each phase, delineation of flood hazard boundaries, traffic, parking, circulation, proposed location of parking spaces, entrance, exits to adjacent streets, typical building elevation drawings proposed for the development that depicts exterior features consistent with Chapter 6, which is our design standards. Such drawings shall also depict the relationship such buildings will have with the streetscape, the proposed number, type, design, and location of signs. The zoning administrator may require a master signage plan depending on the size and complexity of the proposed development. So these are the type of things that that go into the process and the review that ultimately the board sees. And then the traffic impact analysis, again, we mention this a lot in the code, just want to keep hammering this home, that they are required for a conditional zoning district.
Jeff?
Yes.
Under there it says if warranted.
Yeah, it is required, I guess, if it meets the warrants is what that's trying to say. So we can, I noticed that when I was just talking about it, and I think we can make that a little bit clearer. We'll make note of that. Then we've got the valid for 2 years, back to the vesting. If it's a multi-phase development plan, it shall be valid for a period of 7 years. Minor modifications can be approved by the zoning administrator under the following criteria. Only changes that are minor in nature that do not significantly alter the site plan or conditions. Minor modifications shall not include a change in use or density and shall not confer an extension of a vested right. Any request for an administrative amendment shall be in writing, signed by the property owner. The applicant must provide any additional information requested. Applicable fee, if there is one. And then any decision by the zoning administrator to approve or deny a request must be in writing and must state the grounds for approval or denial. And if the proposed alterations do not meet the criteria herein, the applicant must apply for a new conditional zoning district. There's almost always, in every single site plan that you review, there's always some kind of minor modification. If you think about it, when you have a master site plan and then they're coming back, sometime within a 2-year period and actually getting the boots on the ground and doing things out on the ground, there almost always is some type of modification to a site plan for whatever reason. So here is the conditional district rezoning procedure. We've got it delineated out: pre-application meeting, application received 90 days prior to planning board, staff and TRC review, neighborhood meeting, planning board review, and then the board of commissioners. That's the approximate 5-month process to go through a conditional zoning request. Then we have special use permits. So this will be the quasi judicial procedures moving forward. Same as, really the same process as conditional use permits, but we're just now, as required throughout the entire state, everybody will be required to call them special use permits and special use permits only. So they're received in the same fashion. So, completed applications. If a site plan is required, 90 days prior to the planning board. If a site plan is not required, then we're given some flexibility for 30 days prior. So where a site plan may not be required would be the example I gave where use might want to locate into a shopping center, into a leased space, and you wouldn't want to penalize somebody for waiting for 90 days if they don't necessarily have to submit a site plan to get a special use permit approval. So that's what that covers. The planning board shall consider the application and make a recommendation, just like any other process, but they do not do the formal evidentiary hearing. That is the Board of Commissioners' purview to do that. So that's just specifying that. And again, the planning board, if they don't make a recommendation within 30 days, then the Board of Commissioners may act on it without that recommendation. And again, the planning board reserves the right to continue that application, but it has to be within the 30-day period unless it is agreed to by the applicant that it can be longer than that. And then the Board of Commissioners shall conduct the public hearing to give the interested parties the opportunity to speak for or against. And of course, it shall be in accordance with the notice requirements of 160D. Quasi-judicial hearing. Public hearing for special use shall be quasi-judicial in nature, requiring the applicant and other interested parties to present competent, substantial, and factual evidence related to the required conclusions. And those are: the proposed use will not materially endanger the public health or safety. The proposed use will comply with all regulations and standards generally applicable within the zoning district, and specifically applicable to the particular type of special use or class of special uses. The proposed use will not substantially injure the value of adjoining property, and the proposed use will be in harmony with the area which it is located. The applicant bears the burden of presenting sufficient factual evidence to allow the board to reasonably make the necessary conclusions. After the public hearing has been conducted, the BOC has the ability to approve or deny the application, either at the same meeting or at the next regularly scheduled BOC meeting. And it shall be based on the evidence presented. And then again, just like the conditional zoning, specific conditions may be proposed, but those conditions have to be agreed to by the applicant. And then the applicant must agree, or if the applicant is unable to submit a written agreement within the time of the meeting, they'll be conditioned on receipt of such written agreement within 15 dates of the date of approval. So the same language as in the conditional zoning. And then again, the Board of Commissioners reserves the right to continue the consideration of a special use permit to a subsequent meeting, date and time certain, if determined additional information is necessary. BOC shall determine contested facts and make its decision within a reasonable time. Every quasi-judicial decision shall be based upon competent material and substantial evidence in the record. Each quasi-judicial decision shall be reduced to writing, reflect the BOC's determination of contested facts and their application to the applicable standards, and be approved by the BOC and signed by the mayor or other duly authorized member. It's effective upon filing of the written decision with the zoning administrator, and the decision of the board shall be delivered within a reasonable time by personal delivery, electronic mail, or first-class mail to the applicant, landowner, or any person who's been submitted, or any person who has submitted a written request for a copy prior to the date that the decision becomes effective. Applications for a special use permit shall be accompanied by sufficient information to allow the town to determine intent, impacts, and compliance with the code and adopted plans. Site plan shall depict the same information as required for a conditional zoning district. And in some cases, a site plan may not be required, such as when a use designated as a special use is intended to occupy a space in an existing building or leasable space. Zoning administrator shall determine whether a site plan is appropriate for the special use permit request. And of course, then it would be distributed as the typical process as we would for a technical review. And again, traffic impact analysis. And we'll make sure we revise the language about warranting. And then again, the minor modifications, same as before. And then this is a little bit different. Every quasi-judicial decision shall be subject to review by the Superior Court by proceedings in nature pursuant to 160D 1402. Appeals must be filed within 30 days after the decision is effective or after a written copy of the decision is provided in accordance with the earlier section in the code, whichever is later.
When we say subject to review, that isn't an automatic, that just gives them that opportunity to go that route, right?
That's correct. And here's the visual for special use procedure, pre-application meeting. Application received 90 days in advance of site plan is required, 30 days if not. Staff and TRC review, neighborhood meeting, planning board review, and board of commissioners. So now these are the two sections that were in two places. This is what Ann was mentioning before, that was removed from the beginning. Because we had it back here in the back as well, thought it was more appropriate just to keep the part back here. Section 3.5 is withdrawal of applications. An applicant may withdraw their application at any time for a zoning text amendment, zoning map amendment, conditional zoning district, or special use permit by written notice to the administrator. And that does happen. However, any withdrawal of an application after the giving of the first public notice as required shall be considered a denial of the petition. An applicant shall remain liable for any and all fees and costs regardless of the withdrawal. Then you have section 3.6, which is the effect of the denial. When the Board of Commissioners denies an application or an application is withdrawn, the BOC shall not consider the same or similar application for a period of 1 year. The administrator shall determine if a subsequent application is dissimilar enough to the initial application to move through the process again. So for example, if somebody made a rezoning request to corridor commercial and it was denied, that same applicant could not make that application for a year, but I, as the zoning administrator, would consider it to be a different application if it was a conditional zoning corridor commercial request. So that would be deemed different in my mind.
Jeff?
Yes.
So under 3.5, it says after the first public notice, and if they withdraw, then it's considered a denial. But would that denial last for a year in the next sentence? Let's say an applicant wanted to withdraw their application because they wanted to finish, working on a community meeting or doing something else, a modification. Would that be considered a withdrawal or just putting it on pause?
Well, you could always table the request or ask for an extension, like for the example with Broad Street. But if they withdraw the request after we have done all of the public noticing, then that would fall into this where they could not do that for a year. That would not be in effect if, say, it was a neighborhood meeting and we'll go back to the example there off of NC 16 there at Alma Village, where we had that neighborhood meeting that had 75 people there and the developer decided to withdraw that request. They withdrew that request prior to the required public noticing, which in my mind is the statutory noticing prior to public hearing, not for neighborhood meetings. So they would not have had to wait another year if they'd wanted to submit another request.
Is there a way to maybe the first public notice, I know it's probably defined somewhere, but what constitute public notice? Just the zoning signs up there or their neighborhood meeting?
Not neighborhood meeting. It would be the signs. It would be when the adjoining property notices go out. The The neighborhood meeting, I would not consider to be the first required public notice by statute. That would be the requirements for mail notices and for signage on the property.
And what mechanism is in place? Let's say instead of an application, an applicant doesn't want to necessarily withdraw, but there was some other details that they wanted to work out. Is there a way that they can kind of, is there a timeline of how long they can kind of pause everything before they continue to move forward?
There is no timeline. And in fact, I had this conversation with Charlie in discussion about Broad Street. You know, how long is too long to keep delaying a process, and especially when they're the ones that are instigating it. And Charlie's answer is you can do it for as long as you deem to be reasonable. There's nothing in the statute that says a delineated time of what may be too short or too long. So there's really nothing delineated as to what a schedule would be, other than what you would think would be reasonable in your own discretion. So in answer to your question, if they're not officially withdrawing something, it could feasibly just be strung out for as long as somebody wanted to or needed to be able to work out something appropriate.
And then, so based on this, so if I am an applicant, I withdraw my application based on the next section 3.6, then it wouldn't be considered, you couldn't resubmit it for a period of a year, correct?
That's correct, but that's only if it's that applicant, and that wouldn't stop them. You know, say you had again the example, and you turned down something that was just a base zoning request for corridor commercial. Say the board's concern was, well, which is a typical one out there in the state, that we're concerned about. While we're okay with ABC use there in a general corridor commercial, we're concerned about XYZ. And so you turn the request down. So one thing that the applicant could do is they could turn around and then request a conditional zoning district, where they could say that we're only asking for use ABC that is within the permitted use table, and not XYZ, which is a very typical way to ask for things. So they could come back and do that as a different zoning request, but they just could not come back and try to rezone the same applicant, the same piece of land through the exact same process for a year.
Even if they withdrew it, because that would be a denial.
If they withdrew it after the public noticing has gone out. But if it's before the public noticing has gone out, and that's the required statutory public noticing, the signs and the adjoining property notices, that's not the neighborhood meeting. So next we get into appeals and variances. So these are the procedures for the Board of Adjustment found in 160D, section 406. One thing to always keep in mind with the variance, and this is where it's different. Most everything requires just a simple majority approval. All decisions by the Board of Commissioners require a simple majority. All recommendations by all of our advisory boards and commissions require a simple majority. But where it differs is in this one instance, and that's when a variance request is coming along. That has to have a 4/5 or what's called a supermajority to be able to be approved.
Yeah.
Yes.
Back up to general requirements. I have a few comments.
Okay.
Right after the citing of the North Carolina general statutes, and it says it's adopted rules of procedure. Shouldn't the Board of Commissioners be the one adopting the rules of procedure for the Board of Adjustment?
Yeah, you do. Okay. Yeah, I see. I guess it doesn't read perfectly that way. We'll make that adjustment.
And then in the next few lines where it talks about the board, maybe you need to write Board of Adjusters, so it's not confusing.
Yeah, there's that board again. We'll make sure we get Board of Adjustment. Okay, thank you. So after we talk about the supermajority for voting on a variance, you've got a section on decisions. The Board of Adjustment shall determine contested facts, makes this decision within a reasonable time. Every quasi-judicial decision shall be based upon competent material and substantial evidence in the record. Each quasi-judicial decision shall be reduced to writing, reflect the BOA's determination of contested facts and their application to the applicable standards, and be approved by the Board of Adjustment and signed by the chair or other duly authorized member of the Board of Adjustment. Quasi-judicial decision is effective upon filing the written decision, and the decision shall be delivered within a reasonable time by personal, electronic mail, or first-class mail. And then, of course, certifying that proper notice has been made. And then again, here's the judicial review. Just as with every quasi-judicial decision, it shall be subject to review by court. And then the other purview of the Board of Adjustment is appeals. So the Board of Adjustment may hear and decide appeals where is alleged there is an error in any file, order, requirement, decision, or determination by the zoning administrator. These are pretty rare. I've heard of them happening, from time to time more in other places, but they're fairly uncommon. And this is not a process that requires a supermajority. It is just a simple majority. So the process is a person who's aggrieved by the zoning administrator's decision may make an appeal. The appeal to the Board of Adjustment shall be filed within 30 days of receipt of the decision, order, determination, or interpretation made by the administrator. Board of Adjustment appeals to the Board of Adjustment shall be filed with the town clerk and shall state the grounds for the appeal. So then the zoning administrator transmits all documents and exhibits to be able to make a actionable decision on. The board shall meet to consider the appeal within a reasonable amount of time to give planning staff the ability to prepare information and for the public notice requirements to be met. I think that should say BOA, Blair, not BOC. And we've got effect of appeal, and appeal stays enforcement of the action. And then the fine accruals stay until a decision is rendered by the Board of Adjustment. That's basically what that means. Attendance required, the official who made the decision or if their successor, if that official is no longer employed, shall be present at the hearing as a witness.
Jeff, at the bottom of that, is that BOC should be BOA?
Yep, I was about to let Blair know that. That should be BOA. And then F.
And just to add, just for clarity, so the remedy after the Board of Appeal is the court system, correct?
That's correct. So we've got variances, and then these are the required findings for the Board of Adjustment to be able to make a decision. When unnecessary hardships would result from carrying out the strict letter of a regulation in this code, the Board of Adjustment may vary any of the provisions upon showing the following. Unnecessary hardship would result from the strict application of the code. It shall be necessary to demonstrate that in the absence of the variance, no reasonable use can be made of the property. The hardship results from conditions that are peculiar to the property, such as location, size, or topography. Hardships resulting from personal circumstances, as well as hardships resulting from conditions that are common to the neighborhood or the general public, may not be basis for granting a variance. So, it's basically if somebody wants to try to claim that meeting a requirement's just costing them too much money or something like that, then that would not be grounds for a variance. But if they can't locate their shed where they want to because of some topographical issue, then that would be grounds for a variance. The hardship did not result from actions taken by the applicant or the property owner. The act of purchasing property with knowledge that circumstances exist that may justify the granting of a variance. So, and I know we need to put a space in there between 3 and 4. Then the requested variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance such that the public safety is secured and substantial justice is received. So, we haven't had a variance case in the town in a good while. I think it's been going on, it's at least been a year and a half in my time here. I think we've had one in the last 2 years. It varies. A place like Charlotte, I mean, they have them regularly, probably 7 to 10 of them a month there. But in smaller towns, it's typically a lot less common. An average of probably once every year or two, something like that. So we're running about what any smaller town typically would. In granting a variance, the Board of Adjustment may attach appropriate conditions to any variance, provided that the conditions are reasonably related to the variance. A variance once granted shall continue indefinitely unless otherwise specified at the time granted. And it runs with the land. It doesn't run with the person. It does run with the land. And then departure from or violation of any of those conditions shall be deemed a violation of the code and shall be subject to the penalties as provided. Then we get into section 3.8, the last section here, violations. So persons may be held jointly or individually accountable for violating the provisions of this code. And they can be any owner or property upon which a violation of this code occurs, any architect, engineer, builder, contractor, agent, other person who knowingly participates in, or any tenant or occupant who has control over or responsibility for the use or development of the subject property. So then we list the different types of violations. Any of the following shall be a violation of the code. Development without approvals or permits. It includes any action to engage in any development, use, construction, remodeling, or other activity of any nature upon land or improvements. Development inconsistent with approvals or permits, and that includes any action to engage in any development, use, construction, remodeling, or other activity of any nature that is any way inconsistent with any approved plan. Submitting false or incomplete information. Knowingly submitting false or incomplete information. Acts of omission. This includes the omissions of any terms, variances, modifications, conditions, qualification placed by the Board of Commissioners, Planning Board, Board of Adjustment, or staff upon any required plan. A use in violation includes any use of land or structures in violation of this code, as well as any action to reconstruct, alter, or convert any structure to allow such illegal use. Failure to act. This includes failing to comply with any lawful order related to this code issued by the zoning administrator, and failing to comply also means disobeying, omitting, neglecting, or refusing to comply with or resisting the enforcement of any provision. Transferring lots in an unapproved subdivision. This includes any person who, being the owner or agent of the lot of any land located within the town of Waxhaw, thereafter subdivides their land in violation of the code, or transfers or sells land by reference to, exhibition of, or any other use of a plat showing a subdivision of land before the plat has been properly approved under the provisions of this code. And then damage to required postings. This includes obscuring, obstructing, removing, or destroying any notice required to be posted or otherwise given under this code. And you wouldn't think that something like that normally happens, but I have history back in previous stops where I had a rezoning request on the town notices, somebody would post, let's just say unflattering internet pictures instead of what the notice citation was for the rezoning. So that does happen. Any of the following persons may be held jointly or individually accountable for violating the provisions of this code. Nothing in this code shall be interpreted to prohibit the continuation of previous enforcement actions undertaken by the town under previously valid ordinances and laws. And the adoption of this code does not affect nor prevent pending or future prosecution of or action to abate violations of previous regulations. So, initiation of enforcement action. Any of the following persons may be held jointly or individually accountable for violating the provisions of this code. Most common one is complaints. Whenever a violation of this code occurs or is alleged to have occurred, any person may file a written complaint with the zoning administrator. The written complaint must clearly state the alleged violation, and then the complaint shall be recorded. Whenever a violation or it is alleged to have occurred, the person may file an anonymous complaint with the zoning administrator. Suspected violations of this code may be referred for investigation by any town official by any means. And of course, we have our own enforcement officer that does most of the heavy lifting on that. Occasionally something comes along that me as a zoning administrator that he'll get my advice on.
Jeff, can we make some type of clarification on 384 on the process for the initiation and call it that? What we have here right now is, the initiation, any of the following persons may be held jointly, blah, blah, blah. And then it goes A, complaints. And instead of a person. So we can say by these procedures, by a complaint, or by a duty to act.
Okay, yep, that's good thoughts. We'll include that in.
Thanks.
I guess the term would be actions.
I would believe so.
Something like that.
It just, you're calling out people, then you talk about something else, a complaint or a duty to act. So
Yeah, we don't want to say
clean
complaint.
that up to say it can be initiated by one of the following actions or any of the following actions.
Okay.
Thank you.
So then we get into inspection and investigation. So in order to determine violations of this code, the zoning administrator shall have the following rights and powers. Inspections upon presentation of proper credentials with consent of the owner, or inspection warrant if necessary to enter on any premises within the jurisdiction at any reasonable hour for the purposes of inspection, determination of code compliance, or other enforcement action required. Investigations, to conduct such investigations as they may reasonably deem necessary to carry out their duties as prescribed, and for this purpose to enter at reasonable times upon any public or private property with consent of the owner for purpose of investigating and inspecting the sites. Supporting documentation to require written statements, certificates, certifications, or the filing of reports with respect to pertinent questions relating to complaints or alleged violations of this code. And then we have notice of violation. When any condition in violation of this code is found to exist, the zoning administrator or designee shall issue a notice of violation to the person responsible for the violation and to the owner of the premises with an order to abate or remove the violation within 30 days. The notice shall be in writing, include a description of the premises sufficient for identification, set forth the violation, and state that if the violation is not corrected as directed by the town, may proceed with any and all applicable enforcement remedies permitted by this code and state law. Any owner or occupant who has received a notice of violation may appeal in writing the decision of the zoning administrator to the Board of Adjustment. Service of the notice shall be by one in any of the following methods: by delivery to an owner personally, or by leaving the notice at the usual residence of the owner or a family member who is over the age of 16 years, delivery of an electronic copy to the owner if electronic mail address is known, by depositing the notice, postage paid in the USPS address to the owner at their last known address, by posting and keeping posted for 30 days a copy of the notice in placard form in a conspicuous place on the premises on which the violation exists when notice cannot otherwise be served.
Hey, Jeff.
Yes.
Hey, it's Jason. Can I just back you up just a little bit on page 43 in that paragraph there? And then under the notice of violation. So in some of the other areas where I've compared this, is, by the way, it's pretty good. But when there's the direction of a notice that has to be developed, other municipalities are iterating what should be included in that notice. And you've sort of got it here, but it isn't too clear. And what I mean by that is, number one is identifying the circumstances giving rise to the violation. Number two would be identifying the actions necessary to comply with the violation. And there's like 5 of them. And I think you've got most of them here. What do you think? And I've got an example I can share with you, but what did you think about something like that?
No, I think that's a very valid thing to add in there. I'll make sure that's not mentioned later.
Yeah, I was going through, I didn't see it. But I thought that might be a valuable addition.
Doesn't look like it. It is a valuable addition. We'll make note that and make sure that we add that right here. We know where it shall be in writing, including a description where we also talk about what the violation is and ways to abate that violation. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, quite frankly, it's the notice shall and then colon and then it's like iterated. This is what the notice should have on it.
Thank you, Jason.
Well,
Feedback.
Along that same line, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So since we are in this electronic age, a photograph of it should probably be included in the file.
And we do that. And that's not mentioned in here, but typically anytime that our code enforcement officer is out on something, he'll take a picture of that and include that in the file. Thank you. Good feedback. So remedies, the remedies and enforcement powers established are cumulative and the town may exercise them in any order or combination. Each day a violation continues shall be considered to be a separate and distinct offense. So that's important. So you can literally find somebody daily for a violation. Can also
Jeff, along those lines, do you so along the lines of the equitable remedies, do you think it would be worthwhile to cite the North Carolina General Statute it's 153A-123?
Yeah, we can do that. 150A.
Well, 153A-123.
153A-123. Got it. So we also have the ability to revoke a development approval. So development approvals may be revoked by the town by notifying the holder with a written statement describing the reason for the revocation. The town shall follow the same development review and approval process required for issuance of the development approval, including any required notice of hearing and the review and approval of any revocation of that approval. Development approval shall be revoked for any substantial departure from the approved application plans or specifications, for refusal or failure to comply with the requirements of any applicable local development regulation or any state law, delegated to the local government for enforcement purposes in lieu of the state, or for false statements or misrepresentations made in securing the approval. Any development approval mistakenly issued in violation of an applicable state or local law may also be revoked. The revocation of a development approval by a staff member may be appealed to the Board of Adjustment. So, and that's some state law stuff too. It gives, you know, if somebody here issues an administrative permit, for instance, in error, which it's never happened to my knowledge in anywhere I've been while I've been around, but I know of some peers where it's happened to, where something has been issued in error. And that doesn't mean that person is then permitted to do whatever based on that error. So, you know, it can be revoked. Stop work orders whenever a structure or any part of a structure is being constructed, demolished, renovated, altered, or repaired in substantial violation of any applicable provision of this code. The zoning administrator may order the specific part of that work that is in violation or would be in violation when work is completed to be stopped immediately. And that is, that's fairly common to do a stop work order on something. It's more common in building inspections, but not uncommon for the zoning side of things. And we also have a stop use order whenever a structure or part of a structure is being used in violation of this code, and they may order that use to be immediately stopped. Then if the owner of any property fails to comply with the notice given pursuant to this chapter, the owner shall be subject to a civil penalty in the amount of $100 per day a violation continues, and each day shall be considered a separate offense subject to this penalty. Then we have abatement. The zoning administrator may have the violation described in the notice summarily abated, removed, or otherwise corrected if the condition is dangerous or prejudicial to the public health or public safety. All expenses incurred by the town shall be chargeable to and paid by the owner of the property. If the expense is not paid, the town may place lien on the land or premises where the violation occurred, and the lien shall have the same priority to be collected as unpaid ad valorem taxes. Criminal penalties. Any person who knowingly or willfully violates any provision of this code shall have committed a misdemeanor pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 14.4. Also have the ability to do an injunction. Enforcement of the provisions of this code may also be achieved by injunction. When a violation occurs, the zoning administrator may either before or after the institution of other authorized actions apply to the appropriate division of the general court for a mandatory or prohibitory injunction commanding the defendant to correct the unlawful condition or cease the unlawful use of the property. Then equitable remedy. The zoning administrator may apply to a court of competent jurisdiction for any appropriate equitable remedy to enforce the provisions of this code. The court shall have jurisdiction to issue such orders as may be appropriate, and it shall not be a defense to the application of the town for equitable relief that there is adequate remedy at law. Forfeiture and confiscation of signs. Any signs installed or placed on public property except in compliance with these regulations will be subject to forfeiture to the public and confiscation. The town has the right to remove and dispose of such signs without notice and to recover from the sign owner or person who placed the sign the full cost of sign removal and disposal. Other remedies and enforcement powers. The town may seek such other remedies and use of other enforcement powers as allowed by law. And I think that gets us through. Congratulations, you've made it through chapter 3.
Hey, Jeff.
Yes.
You talked about the signs here. Would those be like the little signs you see all over the place, like the for sale signs or, you know, at the street corners, like houses this way or?
Yep, that's the ones. That's the ones. And typically, you know, we don't take those and just, you know, not allow people to not get them back. I mean, it's typical process that we'll, you know, if we can or know who it is, that we notify them to come get their signs. And we keep them in the back of the truck or keep them on the property here for a good little while before we just discard them. You know, in previous places I've been, I've even known people to come to the town hall and to the the back of the code enforcement truck and dig through the back of the trucks, or, a lot of times you'll set them aside on the ground, kind of on the side, so that somebody can come pick them back up.
What, since we're on that a little bit, what is our position specifically on those bootleg signs?
So they are not allowed in the right of way. It's set, I think political signs are the ones that are a little bit different. And so, a lot of times what happens is they get particularly abundant on the weekends more than any other time, as a lot of these places stick out their signs for open houses or things like that. And a lot of them kind of take care of themselves, where they'll come and get them themselves, but sometimes some of them are left over. And if they are, we typically, Larry will grab as many of them as he can as he's going around town. That's our typical stance on them.
So typically, and I've used these in my businesses for years and years, those bootlegs were usually put out after a town staff would go home and picked up before a town staff member would come to work on Monday. But saying that, what we're looking at here is still a violation of our town ordinances. It's not like we couldn't decide who put them out there. So do we want to enact any action with respect to the bootlegs, whether they're out there Monday through Friday or Friday night through Sunday night? Are we looking at that?
So yes, so that's kind of the typical yes, where over the weekends they can do that whenever somebody's not working, and that is a typical way that is handled by people that want to put out those signs. Let me pull up what we have written now in chapter 10, and I can give you a specific answer if I can find it quickly.
While you're doing that, just a suggestion on that. I mean, the bootlegs can get out of hand. You can have them, if you're a busy community, you can have them every 10 feet for a mile. It gets a little onerous to go out there. But one of the remedies, I know some in the southwest areas of the country, where the town actually, if it was their right of way, they would actually create a monument for certain types of signage, certain type of directional signage, much like the wayfinding signs that we have for the town. They would have these columns or pilasters that had slots in them for direction. So say if it was a community name, it would be in that, and those things could be interchangeable, but the town would receive some revenue from that, because instead of the bootlegs, that person would then have to rent the space from the town. Have you seen that anywhere here?
I have not seen that in North Carolina, but I've heard that exists on the West Coast. Does that sound like where you've seen it before?
Yes, I've paid many a fees for it. So it's something, it just cleans it up a little bit and makes the wayfinding method a little bit nicer on what the environment is of town. If you don't want to have the town be recognized as soon as you come in that there's 10,000 bootlegs out every Friday night, maybe we should look into that.
Okay, yeah, I'll see if I can find some examples there from the West Coast and see what they look like.
Hey, Jeff, along those same lines, and I know you touched upon political signs, but how can you differentiate between political signs? Isn't that content-based?
Well, political signs are very specifically discussed in the statute versus other signs. So that's why. So let's see, we have about 15 minutes, and non-conforming situations is 5 or 6 pages. So let's see if we can blast through this. Hopefully it's fairly straightforward stuff. So it's a short chapter, but we do have it divided up into 9 different sections. We've got the general housekeeping type stuff. Then we talk about non-conforming lots, non-conforming uses. Then we talk about non-conforming structures, then non-conforming signs, non-conforming accessory uses and structures, non-conforming manufactured home parks. Then we've got non-conforming features, which is pretty much everything else. If it's not a use, if it's not a sign, like say if it's some landscaping requirement or some parking requirement that is non-conforming, that's what that means. Then temporary non-conformances, and then changes of tenancy or ownership. So a lot of referencing of non-conforming everything. So non-conformities are declared to be incompatible with permitted uses in the districts established by this code. It is the intent of this code to allow non-conformities to continue until they are removed, but not to encourage their survival. So any parcel of land, use of land, easement, building, or structure lawfully existing on the date of any text amendment in this code or on the date of a zoning map amendment that does not conform to the use or dimensional requirements of the zoning district in which it is located may be continued and maintained in accordance with the provisions of this chapter. A nonconformity shall not be changed to any other nonconformity unless the Board of Adjustment finds that the new proposed nonconformity is more in character with the uses and development patterns in the zoning district in which it is located. In approving such a request, the Board of Adjustment may require appropriate conditions and safeguards in accordance with the purpose of this code. And a nonconformity shall only be extended, enlarged, or intensified in conformity with this chapter. So then we got non-conforming lots, vacant lots for which plats or deeds have been recorded in the Office of the Register of Deeds, which fail to comply with the minimum area or other dimensional requirements of the zoning district in which they are located, may be used for any of the uses permitted in the zoning district in which it is located, provided that where the lot area is not more than 25% below the minimum specified in this code, the other dimensional requirements are otherwise complied with. The zoning administrator is authorized to issue a certificate of zoning compliance. Where the lot area is more than 25% below the minimum specified in this ordinance or other dimensional requirements cannot be met, the Board of Adjustment may in its discretion approve a variance such dimensions as shall conform as closely as possible to the required dimensions. Recombination of non-conforming. Yes.
If we can go back just for clarity on vacant lots or properties that are what we're calling non-conforming, if they've been in existence, are we referring to in this section properties that wouldn't be conforming to the current codes and uses? And would they automatically be granted this non-conformity, or would they have to apply if they were a known violation or a known non-conforming issue?
So, we've taken great care when we adopt this new code to have as little non-conforming situations as we can. And, if and when they do happen in any time, they can continue to go on as legal non-conformity. So they wouldn't have to apply for anything. I guess it really just happens. So where these things would come into play would be, if they have a vacant lot and if they want to do some type of development on it, and for some reason it's become non-conforming for whatever reason that may be. Now, if it's a, I'll skip down here. If it's a single family lot, which is the most common way that properties can become non-conforming. So what we say here is in any district in which single family dwellings are permitted, notwithstanding limitations imposed by other provisions, a single family dwelling and customary accessory buildings may be erected on any single lot of record after the effective date of this code, provided that all applicable setback requirements of the zoning district are met. So we're not looking to punish anybody in a subdivision or anything like that, or any residential piece of land by adopting a new code and then they can't do anything with their property. So that's not the intention. So what this says is that as long as they can meet the other requirements of the code, which is a very common way to do it in zoning practice, then we would allow the single family dwelling to locate on property.
So what we're saying here, if you had two adjacent lots and one had a structure, the other one didn't, even though it was approved sometime in the past, if they wanted to improve that second lot with a structure, they would have to conform to the current existing codes.
They would have to conform to the current existing codes if they can. If they are a non-conforming lot, they would still have the ability to build a house there if they can meet all of the other requirements of the code.
But if there's something, and this comes up here a lot in the older sections of town, so if there's something that they cannot comply with, some physical constraint on the property or something, then I'm going to guess it would be the zoning administrator that would make that call?
Yes, that's right. So, say you have, for an example, we might have a lot that's zoned R4, and you have one lot that's got a house, and it's got a minimum lot width of, say, 70 feet. So it meets the minimum lot width requirements of R4. So it's a conforming lot. But say the person owns a lot that's next door to it, and they have a, I don't know, let's say it's a 45-foot lot as an example. So that does not meet the minimum lot width requirements for a single family lot. But if when we adopt this code and we create that nonconformity there, then if they can meet all of the other requirements of the code, the setback requirements and such, then they can still locate a house there.
Okay, and again, that's just basically going using some reasonableness to apply to a situation that you can't necessarily cover in black and white documents. So the zoning administrator would make that call. If they couldn't meet it, you could still improve the property. There's still a way to do it. Okay.
There is a way to do it. That's right. Well, there's always a way to do it. There's just different ways to do it. And this is the way to do it for single family lots. And then up here is the way to do it for pretty much other vacant lots. So that's how it works. You always have a way to do it. There's just different ways to do it.
Okay, fair enough. I just want to make sure, because there's a lot of people that come to us with odd properties, something that was slivered off 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 years ago, and it's never been improved, and now they want to do something with it. And, now we have a whole new set of rules. So got to have some, I guess that's the gray area that we sometimes have to deal with.
That's right. That's right. So, that's why these things are in place, because there's always going to be peculiarities, as you said. I mean, you can have as much black and white code as you want, but there's always going to be shades of gray. So, and we've got recombination of non-conforming vacant lots. If two or more adjoining lots with continuous frontage are in single ownership at any time after the adoption or amendment of this code, and such lots individually are too small to meet the dimensional requirements of the district in which they are located, such group of lots shall be considered as a single lot or several lots of minimum permitted size in the lot. So if somebody has two vacant lots that do not meet the code, then we would consider that to be one lot in order for somebody to be able to meet the requirements of the code. Non-conforming lots occupied by buildings or structures that fail to comply with the dimensional requirements for the district in which they are located may continue to be used, provided the specific nonconformity is not increased. The minimum dimensional requirements of this code shall not be construed as prohibiting the conversion of an existing building which does not meet the minimum yard requirements for another permitted use, so long as no former encroachment is made into the existing yards. And we've got non-conforming uses. So a legal nonconforming use is a use existing legally at the time of the passage of this code or the time of annexation into the town's jurisdiction. So a use established after the passage of this code, which does not conform to the regulations in which it is located, shall be considered an illegal nonconforming use and is a violation of this code. Then legal nonconforming uses may continue in accordance with the following provisions. So any nonconforming use shall not be expanded except for in conformity with this chapter, provided herein that nonconforming use may be extended throughout any parts of the building which were manifestly arranged or designed for such use at the time of adoption of this code. Expansion shall include an intensification of such use, a physical expansion that results in increased capacity. So you can't extend any part of that. No such use shall be extended to occupy any land outside of such building is what that's saying. And then a nonconforming use of land outside of buildings shall not be extended, enlarged, or intensified on additional land after the effective date of this code. Then a nonconforming use shall not be moved from one location on site to another location on the same site unless the lot owner can demonstrate to the satisfaction of the zoning administrator that the relocation of the use will not increase the impacts of such use on the public. A nonconforming use shall not be changed to any other use unless the new use conforms to the standards of the zoning district in which it is located. And then once a nonconforming use is changed to a conforming use, the nonconforming use shall not be reestablished. A nonconforming use or characteristic of use shall not be reestablished after vacancy, abandonment, or discontinuance for any period of 6 consecutive months. Pretty standard stuff. No structural changes shall be made in any structure integral to and occupied by a nonconforming use except structural changes ordered by an authorized official in order to ensure safety of the structure, maintenance and repairs to keep the structure in sound condition, structural changes necessary to convert the nonconforming use to a conforming use. An existing nonconforming residential structure may be enlarged or altered provided that no additional dwelling units result. Any such enlargement or alteration shall be in compliance with all dimensional requirements of the district or use. The structure and its accompanying use may be moved to another location on the lot so long as the structure meets applicable requirements. And any nonconforming use may be extended throughout any parts of a structure that were manifestly arranged or designed for the use at the time of adoption or amendment of this code, but no such use shall be extended to occupy any land outside such structure. Then we got nonconforming structures. So a legal nonconforming structure is a structure built, including a building existing legally at the time of passage of this code or the time of annexation into the town's jurisdiction, which does not by reason of design or dimensions conform to the regulations of the district in which it is situated. A structure established after the passage of this code which does not conform would be considered a violation. And then legal nonconforming structures may continue on any building devoted in whole or in part to any nonconforming use. Work may be done on ordinary repairs or on repair or replacement of non-bearing walls, fixtures, wiring, plumbing, provided that the content of the building as it existed at the time of passage or amendment shall not be increased. So basically, you just can't increase the nonconforming part of the structure. Structural changes necessary to convert the nonconforming use to a conforming use shall be permitted. A nonconforming structure shall not be moved to another location unless it conforms to the standards of the district. And a nonconforming structure shall not be rebuilt, altered, or repaired except in conformity with this code after sustaining damage or necessitating repair exceeding 60% of the replacement cost of the structure at the time of damage or wear, provided that any permitted reconstruction shall begin within 6 months of the time of damage or notice and shall be completed within 12 months after the issuance of the permit. A nonconforming structure shall not be demolished and rebuilt as a nonconforming structure. Then I think last page or two, nonconforming signs. So is a sign existing legally at the time of the passage of this code or the time of annexation into the town's jurisdiction, which does not by reason of location, type, design, or dimensions conform to the regulations of the district in which it is located. A sign erected or created after the passage of this code, which does not conform to the regulations, of course, would be considered in violation of this code. Nothing in this code shall prevent the normal maintenance of an existing non-conforming sign. However, they shall not be changed to another type of sign of non-conforming stature, provided the copy, content, or message of the sign may be changed so long as the shape or size of the sign is not altered. Should not be structurally altered except for normal maintenance. Physically expanded, enlarged, or extended. Reestablished after discontinuance for 180 days. Reestablished after the sign is removed except for normal maintenance. Or reestablished after damage or destruction where the estimated expense of reconstruction exceeds 60% of the appraised replacement cost. In non-conforming accessory uses and structures, no non-conforming accessory use or accessory structure shall continue after the principal use or structure is terminated by abandonment, discontinuance, damage, or destruction unless said such use or structure thereafter is made to conform to the standards. Non-conforming manufactured home parks may not be expanded or increased in size. This requirement shall include adding spaces to the park. And then we have non-conforming features. So this is all the other stuff that I talked about. If there's some type of physical characteristic, maybe it has to do with street parking, landscaping, buffering, lighting standards. Those are the examples that we gave in here. That the feature added or changed after passage of this code, which does not conform to the regulations of the district in which it is situated, shall be considered an illegal non-conforming feature and in violation of this code. But legal non-conforming features may be continued subject to the following. No action shall be taken which increases the degree or extent of the nonconformity, and any enlargement, extension, structural alteration, parking changes, and other changes to the lot design and access shall conform to all current requirements. Then for developments existing before the effective date of the current regulations, nonconforming features created by change in regulations may continue to exist. And structures with such nonconforming features may be reconstructed if demolished or destroyed. The last two paragraphs, temporary nonconformances, an administrative permit may be issued by the zoning administrator for an appropriate period of time not to exceed 12-month increments for nonconforming buildings, structures, or uses incidental to the building construction or land development or deemed to be generally beneficial, provided that the owner of such temporary nonconforming use agrees to remove the temporary nonconforming use upon expiration of the permit. Then we have changes of tenancy or ownership. There may be a change in tenancy or ownership of an existing nonconforming use or structure, provided there is no change in the nature or character of such nonconforming use or structure, except as provided herein. And that is non-conforming.
That's not it yet. That's Hey Jeff, I got something. I got something for you.
What you got?
Just because I got to earn my wages today. In section 11.3 in non-conforming uses, I think that's probably the best place to put it because I looked through here. I didn't see it mentioned anywhere, but there are two components that I've seen elsewhere that I didn't really see here. And those were, and these two go together, and it's the presumption of discontinuance and then overcoming that presumption of abandonment. So there are specific steps to each one, but since we didn't mention it in here, it might be worthwhile to kind of mention the steps of number one would be the presumption of discontinuance somewhere in the non-conforming uses, and there's like six substeps to that, and then something that goes with that is how you overcome that presumption of abandonment. So this provides the opposite side of that first one, where the owner can prove it hasn't been abandoned by these two subsequent steps.
Do you have sample language you can share?
Of course I do.
Awesome. Plagiarism is the best form of flattery in code writing.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, and I've seen it in a couple different places, so I know it's not just a one-off thing.
Yeah, that'd be great. Happy to do that.
Great. Okay, then that's all I got.
Okay, anybody else have a last question on non-conforming?
That's a lot of language. So good job. I mean, that's tough to manage that one.
Well, I've made it this entire 3 hours and my voice hurts, but not too bad. But
Well, you can join us for the next 45 minutes too.
well, I know. Yeah, I think I'm going to let Melody do the heavy hitting for our staff agenda review session and let my voice take a rest.
All right. Well, it is just after 4 o'clock. And as Jeff said, that we want to go ahead and, well, all right. Ann's got one more question. Well, here we go. Ready?
Yep. Jeff, what's our homework for next week?
Oh, yes, thank you. So we'll go back, we'll do chapter 2 and then chapter 9, which are the environmental regulations.
All right. Do your homework, children. Here we go. There's a test on it at the end, right?
Oh, yeah. Test at the retreat.
All right. Sounds like a grand idea. All right. Great job, guys. Thanks for hanging in there and going through. It's a lot of language to absorb, but appreciate that. And given the time, and unless there's any other comments by anybody, I don't see any hands up for any of that. We are going to adjourn this meeting. So have a great evening, everybody. We'll see you on the big screen. Thanks, Barbie, for taking over today.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Great. We are adjourned.